The rain came down in sheets across the landing platform of transit station Kepler 7, turning the metal grating into a mosaic of puddles that reflected the neon advertisements flickering overhead. Daniel Reeves had exactly 17 minutes before his connecting shuttle departed for the outer colonies, and he'd spent 14 of them watching the downpour through the terminal windows, wondering if the weather control systems had malfunctioned again. He stepped out into the deluge anyway, his single duffel bag clutched against his chest, boots splashing through water that was already ankle-deep in places. The umbrella he'd bought from a vending machine, flimsy polymer thing that cost twice what it should, snapped open above his head with a sound like cracking bones. That's when he saw her. She stood beneath one of the platform's support pillars, completely drenched, her clothing plastered to a frame that was too thin, too angular to be human. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between pearl and pale lavender in the station's artificial light. No umbrella, no bag, no obvious destination. Just standing there, water streaming down her face, her large eyes, violet, he noticed, with vertical pupils, fixed on something in the middle distance. Daniel had grown up on Earth's lower districts, where you learned early that minding your own business kept you breathing. But he'd also been raised by a grandmother who'd boxed his ears whenever he walked past someone who needed help. He angled his path toward the pillar. "Hey!" he called out over the drumming rain. "You stuck out here?" She turned to look at him, and for a moment her expression held such perfect stillness that Daniel wondered if she'd understood. Then her lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that were just a fraction too sharp, too white. "The precipitation caught me unprepared," she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that seemed to harmonize with itself. "I have no protection." Daniel glanced at his chronometer. 12 minutes. He looked at the girl, because despite the alien features, there was something undeniably young about her, maybe his age or close to it, and made a decision that would later be taught in 3 different academies as a case study in diplomatic protocol. "Here," he said, moving the umbrella to cover them both. He had to hold it at an awkward angle. She was nearly a head taller than him. "Where are you trying to go?" "Gate 73, she said. "The Royal Clipper to the Andovin sector." Daniel blinked. The Andovin sector was controlled by the Celestial Assembly, one of the most powerful political entities in known space. "That's where I'm headed. Well, the shuttle route goes through there anyway. Come on." They walked together across the platform, Daniel's arm starting to ache from holding the umbrella high enough to cover her properly. He was getting soaked on his left side, but she remained mostly dry, her strange eyes darting to him every few seconds, with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I am called Lyrianne," she said, as they reached the covered walkway that led to the gates. "What is your designation?" "Daniel. Just Daniel." He shook out the umbrella, watching water spray across the floor. "You traveling alone? That seems, I don't know, unusual." Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe, or something else. "My companions were delayed. I chose to proceed independently." "Brave," Daniel said, though privately he thought it was more foolish than brave. The transit stations were relatively safe, but relatively didn't mean much when you were dealing with dozens of species, some of whom viewed others as prey, property, or both. They moved through the terminal together, Lyrianne drawing stares from the various aliens crowding the concourses. A group of Carthaxian traders, their exoskeletons painted in traditional merchant patterns, stopped their conversation to watch her pass. A Vrenian diplomat, distinguished by the ceremonial scarring on his arms, actually took a step back, his hand moving to his chest in what Daniel recognized as a gesture of respect. He noticed, but Lyrianne seemed oblivious, her attention focused on navigating the crowd with a kind of careful grace, as if she wasn't entirely comfortable with the press of so many bodies around her. Gate 73 was packed. The Royal Clipper was one of the premium routes, and even in the common boarding area, the amenities were a cut above the usual station fare. Daniel found 2 seats near a viewport that looked out onto the docking bay, where he could see their shuttle being serviced by a swarm of maintenance drones. "Thank you," Lyrianne said as she settled into the seat beside him. "Your kindness is noted and appreciated." There was something formal about the way she spoke, an underlying structure to her words that suggested translation wasn't quite capturing everything. Daniel had heard that cadence before, in the few times he'd interacted with the more aristocratic species, the ones who viewed humanity as recent arrivals to the galactic stage, barely civilized and certainly not worth serious attention. "Don't mention it," he said. "Rain sucks no matter what planet you're on, right?" She tilted her head, pupils dilating slightly. "Yes, the precipitation is universally inconvenient." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Daniel pulled out his datapad, intending to review the documentation for his new job. Assistant technician on a mining operation in the Kepler belt, nothing glamorous but steady work, but found his attention drifting to Lyrianne instead. Her clothing, now that it was starting to dry, revealed itself to be far more elaborate than he'd initially thought. The fabric held patterns that seemed to shift and change as it moved, depicting scenes he couldn't quite focus on. Starfields, perhaps, or abstract representations of something beyond his understanding. Her jewelry, which he'd taken for simple adornment, bore symbols that nagged at the edge of his memory. "First time in the outer colonies?" he asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. "No," she said, "but it has been some time since I traveled this route. Things change." "Yeah, they do." Daniel glanced around the terminal, at the mix of species and cultures, the casual intermingling that would have been impossible a generation ago. "My grandfather used to say that humanity joined the galactic community just in time to help tear down the old barriers. I'm not sure he was right about that, but it's nice to think about." Lyrianne's eyes found his, and for a moment he saw something in them that might have been sadness, or weariness, or perhaps just the weight of experience. "Your grandfather sounds wise." "He was stubborn," Daniel said with a slight smile. "But yeah, wise too." The boarding announcement came through in 6 different languages, the Galactic Standard version accompanied by a holographic display showing seat assignments and safety information. Daniel stood, shouldering his bag, and was surprised when Lyrianne remained seated. "You're not boarding?" he asked. "I will board through a different entrance," she said. There was something apologetic in her tone. "Protocol requires it." Daniel wanted to ask what kind of protocol, but the crowd was already moving toward the gate, and he could see the boarding crew getting impatient with stragglers. "Well, safe travels, Lyrianne. Thanks for the company." "Wait." She reached into a fold of her clothing and withdrew a small crystal, no larger than his thumbnail, that glowed with an inner light. "Please, take this." "I can't," Daniel started, but she pressed it into his palm, her fingers cool and smooth against his skin. "A token of gratitude," she insisted, "for the umbrella, for your kindness to a stranger." The crystal was warm in his hand, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Daniel closed his fingers around it, feeling foolish, but also oddly touched. "Thank you. I hope you find your companions." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face entirely. "I suspect they will find me first." Daniel joined the boarding queue, glancing back once to see Lyrianne still sitting there, her hands folded in her lap, looking small and alone despite her height. Then the crowd pushed him forward, and she was lost from sight. The shuttle was half empty, which surprised Daniel given the premium nature of the route. He found his assigned seat in the common section, row 37, barely above steerage, and settled in for the 8-hour journey to the first waypoint. The crystal Lyrianne had given him sat in his pocket, occasionally pulsing against his thigh like a second heartbeat. He must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, someone was shaking his shoulder with enough force to rattle his teeth. "Up!" commanded a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a mechanical crusher. "Now!" Daniel's eyes snapped open to find himself staring at what could only be a member of the Celestial Assembly's Royal Guard. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in articulated plates of what looked like living metal, eyes glowing with an amber light that suggested it was scanning him with multiple sensory systems simultaneously. What?" Daniel managed. "You will come with me," the guard said. It wasn't a request. Around them, The other passengers were studiously avoiding eye contact, finding sudden interest in their datapads and refreshment trays. Daniel stood on shaking legs, his mind racing through everything he might have done wrong. Had he somehow broken a law he didn't know about? Was there some regulation about accepting gifts from aliens? Had the crystal been contraband? The guard led him through the shuttle's interior, past the common sections and into areas marked with symbols Daniel recognized as restricted access. Other passengers watched with expressions ranging from pity to morbid curiosity. One human woman, old enough to be his mother, mouthed something that might have been sorry or lawyer. They passed through a security checkpoint, where another guard scanned Daniel so thoroughly he could feel the energy crawling across his skin, then through a door that dilated open into a completely different world. The premium section of the Royal Clipper wasn't just first class, it was a mobile palace. The floors were covered in something that felt like silk, but shifted colors with each step. The walls displayed real-time views of the space around them, giving the illusion that they were flying through the void unprotected. And the air smelled of things Daniel had no name for, spices and flowers from worlds he'd only seen in textbooks. The guard stopped before a door marked with the same symbols he'd seen on Lyrian's jewelry. "Enter," it said. "You are expected." The door opened before Daniel could knock. Inside, the cabin was larger than his entire apartment back on Earth had been. Lyrian sat on a seat that resembled a throne more than furniture, her wet clothing replaced by robes that seemed woven from starlight itself. But it wasn't her transformation that made Daniel's breath catch. It was the 12 other figures in the room. Each one radiated power and presence in a way that made the air feel thick. Their species varied. He recognized a few, including what had to be an ambassador from the Vrenian collective and one of the insectoid Carthaxians from the terminal. But they all shared one thing. They were staring at him with expressions that ranged from intense curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "Daniel Reeves," Lyrian said, and her voice carried a weight it hadn't possessed before, a harmonic resonance that seemed to fill the entire space. "Please, approach." He walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from his body, acutely aware of his worn boots squeaking on the pristine floor, his cheap clothing marking him as utterly out of place in this gathering of what were clearly some of the most important beings in the galaxy. "Your radiance," one of the figures said. The Vrenian, his voice tight with something that might have been concern or anger. "With respect, this is highly irregular. The human is not cleared for this level of interaction." The human, Lyrian said, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face, showed kindness to a stranger in need. "That is clearance enough for me, Ambassador Kreth." Daniel felt his stomach drop as understanding crashed over him like a physical force. "Your Radiance." The formal title of address for the Crown Princess of the Celestial Assembly, one of the most powerful individuals in known space. He'd shared an umbrella with royalty. He'd made small talk with someone who could order the obliteration of entire star systems. He'd called her brave for traveling alone. "I didn't know," he said, and was proud that his voice only shook a little. "Your Radiance. I apologize if I—" "Stop." Lyrian stood, and the light in the room seemed to bend toward her. "You have nothing to apologize for. In fact, I believe I owe you an explanation." She glanced at the assembled dignitaries, and Daniel saw something pass between them, some unspoken communication that involved subtle shifts in posture and the kind of micro-expressions that came from long diplomatic practice. "I will be brief," Lyrian said, addressing the room but somehow including Daniel in that address. 3 hours ago, an attempt was made on my life at Transit Station Kepler 7. My security detail was compromised. My location was known to hostile elements. I was alone, vulnerable, and exposed. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The rain, the pillar. She hadn't been caught unprepared. She'd been hiding. "And then," Lyrian continued, "a human approached me. He had no wealth to gain from my favor, no political advantage to seek, no way of knowing who or what I was. He saw someone in distress and offered help. He shared his protection, walked with me through danger, and asked for nothing in return except perhaps pleasant conversation." One of the Carthaxians made a clicking sound that Daniel's translator rendered as skeptical amusement. The human seeks reward now, surely. They always do. Clever, to appear selfless while engineering an introduction to power. Is that true? Lyrian asked, turning to Daniel. Did you recognize me? Did you know what you were doing? No, Daniel said honestly. I thought you were just someone stuck in the rain. I would have done the same for anyone. The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, thundering in his ears like drums. Impossible, the Carthaxian said finally. No species is that altruistic without calculation. Humans are, said a new voice, and Daniel turned to see another human entering the room, a woman in formal diplomatic attire, her grey hair pulled back severely, her eyes sharp. It's one of our most infuriating and endearing qualities. We help strangers because we were raised to believe that's what decent people do. No deeper motive required. Ambassador Park, Lyrian acknowledged with a slight nod. Your timing is impeccable. I came as soon as I heard you'd brought a civilian into a royal audience, Ambassador Park said. She looked at Daniel with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and approval. What did you do, son? Shared an umbrella, Daniel said weakly. Of course you did. Park sighed. Your radiance, if I may be permitted to speak frankly. Always, Ambassador. This young man has no security clearance, no diplomatic training, and from the look of his documentation, he's supposed to be on his way to a mining job in the outer colonies. While I appreciate the gesture of gratitude, having him here puts both him and yourself in a complicated position. I am aware, Lyrian said, which is why I propose a solution. She reached into her robes and withdrew a data crystal similar to the one she'd given Daniel earlier, but larger, more elaborate. Daniel Reeves has demonstrated the kind of character that the Celestial Assembly values above all else: compassion without agenda, courage without posturing, and kindness as a default state rather than a tactical choice. I wish to offer him a position within my personal staff. The room erupted. Multiple voices spoke at once, in multiple languages, creating a cacophony that Daniel's translator struggled to parse. He caught fragments: unprecedented, unvetted, security risk, insult to protocol. Ambassador Park held up a hand, and gradually the noise subsided. Your Radiance, you can't be serious. This young man, however well-intentioned, is completely unprepared for life at the royal court. He would be eaten alive within a week. Then we train him, Lyrian said simply. Humans have proven remarkably adaptable to our customs and traditions. Some would say suspiciously so. Because we have to be, Park said, her voice sharp. We're the newest species at the table, Your Radiance. We adapt or we get left behind. But that doesn't mean we can simply drop an untrained civilian into the deep end of court politics and expect him to swim. Daniel found his voice. Can I say something? Every eye in the room turned to him. He swallowed hard, feeling sweat begin to bead on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. I appreciate the offer, Your Radiance. I really do. But Ambassador Park is right. I'm not qualified for this. I barely finished secondary education. I've never been off Earth except for this trip. I don't know your protocols or your languages or your... He gestured vaguely at the assembled dignitaries. You're anything, really. I helped you because it seemed like the right thing to do, not because I wanted a reward. I know, Lyrian said gently. That is precisely why I'm making the offer. The Vrenian ambassador, Kreth, stepped forward. His species was known for their warrior culture, their bodies covered in ceremonial scars that denoted battles won and lost. He studied Daniel with eyes that seemed to catalogue every weakness, every vulnerability. A test, Kreth said. If the human is to be considered for royal service, let him prove himself worthy. The Celestial Assembly has protocols for this situation. The trials of merit, another voice said, one of the figures Daniel hadn't been introduced to yet, a being that seemed to be made partially of crystalline structures that refracted the light into rainbow patterns. An ancient tradition, rarely invoked in modern times, but still valid. Lyrian's expression shifted to something Daniel couldn't quite read. The trials are not meant to be easy, Councillor Jan. They were designed to test individuals who have trained their entire lives for court service. Then perhaps, Kreth said, with what might have been a smile, the human will surprise us. His species seems fond of doing the unexpected. Daniel looked between them, trying to understand what he was being volunteered for. What are these trials? 3 challenges, Lyrian explained, and he could hear reluctance in her voice. Physical, intellectual, and social. Designed to test whether a candidate possesses the necessary qualities to serve in a sensitive position within the Assembly. They are difficult. How difficult? Daniel asked. Ambassador Park made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. Last year, a Carthaxian war champion attempted the trials. She had 40 years of military experience and diplomatic training from the finest academies in her sector. She made it through the first challenge and collapsed during the second. And you're saying I should try this? Daniel looked at Lyrian, searching her face for some indication of what she wanted him to do. I am saying, Lyrian said carefully, that the choice is yours. Accept the position without the trials, and you will face endless scrutiny and doubt from those who believe humans are too primitive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to hold positions of trust. Every mistake you make will be magnified, every success attributed to luck or my favoritism. Or, Kreth interjected, attempt the trials and fail, as you almost certainly will, and at least earn respect for having the courage to try. Humans are known for their audacity, if nothing else. Or succeed, the crystalline Councillor Jean added, their voice like wind chimes in a storm, and prove that the Celestial Assembly's judgment of your species has been incomplete. Daniel's mind raced. He'd come out here to work on a mining station, to send money back to his grandmother, to build a life away from Earth's overcrowded lower districts. This was insane. This was suicide. This was... When would the trials take place? He heard himself ask. The shuttle will dock at the Andovin Central Station in 6 hours, Lyrian said. The trials could be arranged within a day of our arrival, if you choose to accept. And if I refuse? If I just want to get off at the next stop and go to my mining job? Then you will leave with my gratitude and the crystal I gave you, which is worth enough to purchase comfortable passage anywhere in assembly space. Lyrian's expression softened slightly. I would not think less of you, Daniel Reeves. You have already given me more than you know. Ambassador Park moved closer to Daniel, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Kid, I need you to understand what you're walking into. The Celestial Assembly is one of the most powerful political entities in known space. They control technology, trade routes, and resources that humanity desperately needs. Having a human in a position of genuine trust within their power structure would be significant, but the cost might be your life. The trials are dangerous? Daniel asked. They're designed to be survivable, Park said, but that's not the same as safe. And even if you survive, you'd be giving up any chance at a normal life. You'd be a public figure, a representative of humanity, whether you wanted to be or not. Every action scrutinized by billions of beings across dozens of species. Daniel thought about his grandmother, who'd raised him on stories of people who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost them everything. He thought about the mining station waiting for him, about the life he'd planned. Safe, predictable, small. He thought about Lyrian standing alone in the rain, vulnerable and hunted, trusting a stranger with her life without knowing anything about him, except that he'd offered help. I'll do it, he said. I'll attempt the trials. The reaction was immediate and varied. Kreth made a sound that Daniel's translator rendered as impressed acknowledgement, while several other dignitaries exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive. Ambassador Park closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain, then nodded once. Very well, Lyrian said, and Daniel could have sworn he saw relief in her expression. Then let it be recorded that Daniel Reeves, human, has accepted the challenge of the trials of merit. Ambassador Park, I trust you will ensure he understands what awaits him. I'll do my best, Your Radiance. Park gestured for Daniel to follow her. Come on, kid. We've got 6 hours to prepare you for something that normally takes years of training. This should be interesting. As Daniel moved to leave, Lyrian's voice stopped him. Daniel! He turned back to find her studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as if she could see right through to whatever core of foolishness or courage had driven his decision. Thank you, she said simply, for the umbrella. You're welcome, Daniel managed. For whatever it's worth, I'm glad you're okay. In the corridor outside, Ambassador Park walked fast enough that Daniel had to jog to keep up. First things first, she said, her voice all business now. The physical challenge will likely involve some kind of combat scenario or endurance test. The intellectual challenge could be anything from strategic puzzles to negotiation simulations. The social challenge is the real killer. You'll be dropped into a formal court situation and expected to navigate it without causing a diplomatic incident. That doesn't sound so bad, Daniel said, then winced at how naive that sounded even to his own ears. Park stopped walking and turned to face him. Listen carefully. The species in the Celestial Assembly have been playing political games since before humanity figured out fire. They communicate through gestures, pheromones, color changes, harmonic frequencies, and about a dozen other methods that we're only beginning to understand. A single wrong word, a misplaced inflection, could be interpreted as anything from an insult to a declaration of war. So why are you helping me? Daniel asked. If this is such a bad idea, why not just tell me to run? Park's expression softened slightly. Because Lyrian is right about one thing. Humanity needs people in positions of genuine trust within these power structures. We've been playing catch-up since we joined the Galactic community, always one step behind, always scrambling to prove we belong at the table. If you somehow pull this off, if you actually pass the trials and earn your place, it would change things. Not overnight, but it would matter. She resumed walking, and Daniel fell into step beside her. Plus, Park added with a slight smile, I'm curious to see if you can actually do it. Humans have this annoying habit of achieving the impossible when everyone else has written us off. It's one of our more endearing qualities. They spent the next hours in intensive preparation. Park pulled up holographic displays showing the various species Daniel might encounter, their cultural norms, their taboos, their hierarchies. She drilled him on forms of address, on the subtle differences between galactic standard as spoken by different races, on the historical context that informed current political tensions. Daniel's head spun with information. He learned that the Carthaxians considered direct eye contact a challenge unless initiated by the superior party. He learned that the Vrenians communicated respect through carefully calibrated degrees of scarring. Too few marks meant insufficient experience, too many meant recklessness. He learned that the crystalline beings like Counselor Jan experienced time differently than biological species, and that interrupting one mid-thought was considered an act of profound disrespect. You're never going to remember all of this, Park said finally, rubbing her eyes. No one could in 6 hours. But here's the secret that most diplomats won't tell you. Most species don't expect perfection from outsiders. They expect effort. Show that you're trying to respect their customs, that you're aware of your own ignorance and willing to learn, and they'll give you more leeway than you'd think. Most species, Daniel asked. Some will use any mistake as ammunition against you, Park admitted. Politics is politics, no matter what form it takes. But Lyrian wouldn't have offered you this if she didn't believe you could handle it. She's young for a crown princess, but she's not naive. She's seen too much for that. Daniel thought about the way Lyrian had looked standing under that pillar, rain-soaked and alone. The assassination attempt, he said. How close did she come to dying? Park was quiet for a long moment. Closer than anyone wants to admit publicly. The Celestial Assembly has enemies, both external and internal. There are factions that believe humanity's rapid integration into galactic affairs is disrupting the old balance of power. Some want to use Lyrian as a symbol of resistance to that change. Others just want her dead, because chaos serves their interests. And I just walked into the middle of all of this, Daniel said. You did, Park agreed. Welcome to interstellar politics, kid. It's exactly as fun as it sounds. The shuttle's announcement chimed, indicating they were approaching Andovin's central station. Through the viewports, Daniel could see the station growing larger, a massive structure that made the transit station where he'd met Lirianne look like a child's toy by comparison. Ships of every size and configuration swarmed around it like insects around a hive, and the lights of the docking bays glittered like stars. "Last chance to change your mind," Park said. "Once we dock, once you're officially registered as a candidate for the trials, there's no backing out without serious political consequences." Daniel looked at the station, at the future rushing toward him like a tidal wave, unstoppable and overwhelming. He thought about his grandmother, who'd never left Earth, but had always told him to reach for something bigger than himself. "No backing out," he said. "Let's do this." Andovin Central Station was a city in space, home to over 3 million beings from hundreds of different species. The docking procedures alone took an hour, and Daniel spent that time watching through the viewport as the station's true scale became apparent. The structure spiraled outward in segments, each one dedicated to different functions: commerce, governance, residential, industrial. At its center, a massive crystal spire rose like a monument to ambition, its surface reflecting and refracting the light from the nearby star into patterns that seemed almost alive. "The celestial spire," Park explained when she noticed him staring. "Seat of the Assembly's primary government. That's where the trials will take place." "Of course it is," Daniel muttered. The debarkation process segregated passengers by status and destination. Daniel found himself ushered through corridors marked with symbols he was only beginning to recognize, flanked by royal guards whose presence turned heads and parted crowds like the wake of a ship. Other humans stared at him with expressions ranging from envy to concern, and he heard whispered speculation in multiple languages about who he was and what he'd done to warrant such attention. The transport to the celestial spire moved through vacuum tubes that offered panoramic views of the station's interior. Daniel watched the various levels flash by. Market districts where species he'd never seen before haggled over goods he couldn't identify. Residential blocks that seemed to defy physics with their impossible architectures. Industrial sectors where machines the size of buildings performed tasks he could only guess at. Overwhelming, isn't it? Ambassador Park sat across from him in the private transport, her expression knowing. "That's one word for it," Daniel said. "How do people function here? How do you keep track of all the different customs and rules and everything?" "Carefully," Park said, "and with the understanding that you're going to make mistakes. The key is learning from them quickly." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Listen, I need to tell you something about the trials. Officially, they're meant to be objective assessments of capability. In practice, they're as political as anything else in the Assembly. The people administering the tests will have their own agendas, their own opinions about humanity and our place in galactic affairs." "So they want me to fail," Daniel said. "Some do," Park agreed. "Others want you to succeed, to prove that the Assembly's methods work regardless of species. Some are genuinely neutral, just curious to see what happens. The point is, you can't predict how they'll react or what they'll throw at you. You can only be ready to adapt." The transport slowed as they approached the spire. Up close, the crystal structure revealed itself to be carved with intricate patterns, entire histories written in visual language across its surface. Daniel recognized a few symbols from his cramming session: the founding species of the Assembly, major historical events, treaties and wars, and moments of transformation. They disembarked into a reception hall that could have held Daniel's entire neighborhood from Earth with room to spare. The floor was polished stone that seemed to glow from within, and the ceiling arched overhead in curves that suggested organic growth more than deliberate construction. Beings of every description moved through the space with the confidence of those who belonged, their conversations creating a symphony of sounds that Daniel's translator struggled to fully pass. A delegation waited for them, more royal guards, several officials in robes that marked them as Assembly functionaries, and Lirianne herself, now dressed in formal regalia that made her look simultaneously more alien and more regal than she had on the shuttle. "Ambassador Park, Daniel Reeves." Lirianne inclined her head in greeting. "Welcome to the Celestial Spire. I trust your journey was comfortable." Enlightening, Your Radiance, Park said with a slight bow. We appreciate your hospitality. Lyrian's eyes found Daniel's, and for just a moment he saw a flash of something that might have been encouragement or apology. Then her expression smoothed back into diplomatic neutrality. The trial council has been convened, she said. They await your presentation, Candidate Reeves. Candidate Reeves. The formality of it made Daniel's stomach clench, but he managed a nod. I'm ready, Your Radiance. No one is ever truly ready, Lyrian said, so quietly that Daniel thought perhaps only he heard it. But courage will suffice. They processed through the spire's interior, climbing levels via platforms that floated on fields Daniel couldn't see or feel. Each level seemed dedicated to different functions of assembly governance, and the beings they passed grew progressively more imposing, their bearings suggesting power and influence accumulated over lifetimes that made Daniel's 23 years feel like a blink. The trial chamber occupied an entire level near the spire's apex. The doors were massive slabs of crystalline material that slid apart with a sound like singing ice, revealing a space that took Daniel's breath away. The chamber was circular, its walls transparent to the space beyond, creating the illusion of standing unsupported in the void. Seating rose in tiers around a central platform, and those seats were filled with representatives from what had to be every major species in the assembly. Daniel recognized a few from Park's crash course, but most were utterly alien, beings of gas and crystal and metal, creatures that defied easy categorization, intelligences housed in bodies that ranged from the familiar to the impossible. At the chamber's highest point sat 5 figures who radiated authority like physical force. The trial council, Daniel realized, the ones who would judge his worthiness. Approach, commanded a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, translated into Galactic standard, but carrying harmonics that suggested multiple speakers in concert. Daniel walked toward the central platform, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes, sensors, and other perceptive organs tracking his every movement. The platform rose beneath him as he stepped onto it, lifting him to a height where he stood level with the council's lowest tier. Daniel Reeves, the voice said again, and Daniel saw that it came from one of the council members, a being that appeared to be composed of liquid light contained within a roughly humanoid outline. Human, 23 standard years of age, born on Earth, Lower District 7. Education, secondary level, unremarkable. Employment history, various manual labor positions, no military service, no diplomatic training, no previous contact with assembly governance structures. The recitation of his ordinariness felt like an indictment. Daniel heard rustling and clicking from the assembled observers, sounds his translator rendered as amusement or contempt. And yet, the liquid light being continued, you have been sponsored for the trials of merit by Crown Princess Lyrian herself, based on an encounter lasting less than 1 standard hour. Explain this disparity. Daniel swallowed. Park had warned him that the questions would be designed to rattle him, to test his composure under pressure. I shared an umbrella, counselor. Her radiance was caught in the rain without protection. I offered to help. You expect this council to believe, another voice interjected. This one from a Vrenian, his scarring so extensive that his skin looked like a topographical map of battles. That you did not recognize the Crown Princess. That your assistance was purely coincidental. I didn't recognize her, Daniel said. I'd never seen images of her radiance before. I just saw someone who needed help. How convenient, a third counselor said. This one a Carthaxian, whose exoskeleton bore patterns that marked her as ancient, even by her species' standards. A human stumbles across the most powerful individual in the assembly, offers aid, and requests nothing in return. Forgive our skepticism, but your species' reputation for opportunism precedes you. Daniel felt anger spark in his chest. My species' reputation for opportunism, or humanity's reputation for not knowing our place. The chamber went silent. Park's warning echoed in Daniel's mind. Every word scrutinized, every inflection analyzed. He'd just challenged a trial counselor's implication, and from the sudden stillness in the room, that was either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid, The Carthaxian counselor's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval or offense. Interesting. You defend your species' honor even while seeking acceptance from ours. I'm not seeking acceptance, Daniel said, and was surprised to find he meant it. I'm here because I was offered an opportunity, and I'm foolish enough to try. If that makes me a typical human, then fine. We are opportunistic. We do reach for things beyond our grasp. We're also adaptable, resilient, and apparently stubborn enough to share umbrellas in the rain without checking credentials first. A sound rippled through the chamber, laughter, or its equivalent across dozens of species. Even some of the council members seemed to react with what might have been amusement. Very well, the liquid light counselor said. Your candor is noted, if not entirely diplomatic. The trials will proceed. First challenge, physical capability and tactical thinking. You will face a combat scenario against an opponent of our choosing. Victory is not required. Survival is. A section of the platform's floor irised open, and from below rose a figure that made Daniel's blood run cold. It stood 7 feet tall, its body a mass of corded muscle and chitin plating, its 4 arms ending in claws that looked capable of shearing through steel. A Dralith warform, Park's voice echoed in his memory, one of the most formidable combat species in known space. Your opponent is fully trained and will not hold back, the Vrenian counselor said. You have 5 minutes to survive. The trial begins now. The Dralith moved like liquid violence, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Daniel dove to the side purely on instinct, feeling the displaced air from claws that could have disemboweled him whistle past his ribs. He rolled, came up in a crouch, and immediately had to scramble backward as the warform pivoted with impossible speed for something its size. The chamber's observers watched in silence, their attention absolute. Daniel could feel their judgment, their expectation of his failure, their curiosity about how long he would last before the inevitable occurred. 5 minutes. He just had to survive 5 minutes. The Dralith came at him again, this time with a calculated combination. High strike with the primary arms, low sweep with the secondary. Daniel couldn't dodge both, so he did something Park probably would have called insane. He lunged forward, inside the creature's reach, where the long claws couldn't get proper leverage. The warform adapted instantly, wrapping 2 arms around Daniel's torso and beginning to squeeze. Daniel felt his ribs creak, felt the air being forced from his lungs. He had seconds before unconsciousness, maybe less. So he headbutted the Dralith in what he hoped was its face. The impact sent stars exploding across his vision, but he felt the grip loosen fractionally. He did it again, then drove his knee upward into what anatomy suggested might be a vulnerable point. The Dralith made a sound like grinding stone and released him, and Daniel stumbled away, gasping, his vision swimming. Unconventional, one of the counselors observed. Desperate, another corrected. Daniel didn't waste breath arguing. The Dralith was already recovering, already reassessing its opponent. He could see it in the way the creature moved, the slight shift in its stance. It had expected an easy victory, a human who would try to run or rely on techniques that wouldn't work against its superior strength and reach. Time to be even more unconventional. Daniel charged. The observers made sounds of surprise or disbelief as he ran directly at the warform, not dodging, not weaving, just sprinting full speed like he was trying to tackle it. The Dralith braced itself, claws spread to catch and tear, and Daniel dropped at the last second into a slide that sent him skidding between the creature's legs. He grabbed one of its ankles as he passed, yanking hard, and the Dralith, caught off balance by the unexpected maneuver, went down hard. The platform shook with the impact. Daniel didn't wait. He was already moving, putting distance between himself and his opponent, buying precious seconds. His lungs burned, his head throbbed from the headbutt, and he was pretty sure at least one rib was cracked, but he was still moving, still surviving. The Dralith rose, and Daniel could have sworn it looked annoyed. It approached more cautiously now, respecting the unpredictable nature of its prey. They circled each other, Daniel staying light on his feet, the warform prowling with the patience of a predator that knew time was on its side. 3 minutes left, if Daniel's internal count was accurate. The next exchange came when Daniel feinted left and dodged right, then immediately reversed direction when the Dralith committed to intercepting him. It was a move from street fights in Earth's lower districts, where desperation bred creativity and survival meant thinking 3 steps ahead of opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed. The claws missed him by centimeters. Daniel felt one scrape across his shoulder, parting cloth and skin, but the pain was distant, separated from him by the adrenaline flooding his system. He kept moving, kept dodging, making himself as difficult a target as possible. "He's not trying to win," someone said from the observers. "He's just trying to last." "Isn't that victory in itself?" another voice responded. The Dralith changed tactics, using its reach to herd Daniel toward the platform's edge, where his mobility would be limited. Daniel saw the trap, but had no choice except to let it happen or expose himself to a direct attack. He backed toward the edge, his heel finding open air, forcing him to stop. The warform struck, a coordinated 4-armed assault that should have ended the trial. Daniel threw himself backward off the platform's edge. The chamber erupted in various exclamations. Daniel's stomach lurched as he fell, the floor rushing up to meet him from 30 feet below. Then something caught him, an energy field that cushioned his descent, lowering him to the ground with a gentle deceleration that felt like floating. Safety protocols, he realized. The trials were designed to test, not kill. Above him, the Dralith looked down from the platform's edge, its body language suggesting what might have been frustration or respect. The liquid light counselor's voice filled the chamber. "Time. The first trial is complete." Daniel lay on the floor for a moment, breathing hard, cataloguing injuries. The gash on his shoulder wasn't deep, the cracked rib would heal, the headache would pass. He was alive. He'd survived. "Candidate Reeves," the Vrenian counselor said, "approach the council." Daniel stood on shaking legs and made his way back to the central platform, which lowered to its original position. The assembled observers watched him with expressions he couldn't read. Some seemed impressed, others disappointed, many simply curious about what would happen next. "You did not defeat your opponent," the Carthaxian counselor stated. "No, counselor," Daniel agreed. "I didn't. You utilized tactics that could generously be described as primitive." "Yes, counselor. And yet you survived the full duration of the trial through improvisation and an apparent willingness to injure yourself in service of that goal." The counselor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Explain your strategy." Daniel took a breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "I couldn't beat a Dralith warform in direct combat. I'm not trained, I'm not strong enough, and I don't have natural weapons. So I didn't try to beat it. I tried to make myself more trouble than I was worth, to survive long enough that victory became irrelevant." "Cowardice," someone muttered from the observers. "Pragmatism," another voice countered. The liquid light counselor spoke. "The purpose of the physical trial is not to demonstrate martial prowess, but to assess capability under pressure and tactical adaptability. Candidate Reeves has shown both. The trial is judged acceptable." Relief flooded through Daniel, so intense it made his knees weak. 1 down, 2 to go. "The second trial will commence after a brief recess," the counselor continued. "Candidate Reeves will be given 1 hour to recover and prepare. Medical assistance is permitted." The platform lowered completely, and Park materialized at his side, her expression caught between pride and exasperation. "A headbutt," she said. "You headbutted a Dralith warform." "It seemed like a good idea at the time," Daniel said. "It was possibly the stupidest thing I've ever witnessed, and I've been a diplomat for 30 years. Park guided him toward a side chamber where medical personnel waited. It was also apparently effective, which just proves that the universe has a deeply ironic sense of humor. The medics, a team of beings whose species Daniel didn't recognize, worked efficiently, sealing the cut on his shoulder with something that felt like liquid ice and wrapping his ribs in a field that immobilized them while accelerating healing. They offered him water and nutrient paste, both of which tasted better than anything had a right to after near death by dismemberment. "The intellectual trial is next," Park said as the medics finished their work. That's actually where I'm most worried. Why? Daniel asked. I might not be a genius, but I can think. It's not about raw intelligence, Park explained. It's about understanding systems, seeing connections, making decisions with incomplete information. The assembly species have been doing this for thousands of years. They think in patterns we're only beginning to recognize. So what do I do? Park smiled, thin and sharp. Same thing you did with the Dralith. Be unpredictable. Be human. The hour passed too quickly. Daniel found himself back in the trial chamber, the platform rising once more to face the council. The observers had grown in number. Word had apparently spread that a human was attempting the trials, and beings of all descriptions now filled the available space, their attention fixed on him with the intensity of those watching something historic or disastrous unfold. Candidate Reeves, the Liquid Light counselor said, the second trial tests your intellectual capacity and decision-making ability. You will be presented with a scenario that requires analysis, strategy, and judgment. There is no single correct answer, but your reasoning will be evaluated by this council. A holographic display materialized around Daniel, showing what appeared to be a star system with multiple inhabited worlds, trade routes, military installations, and complex networks of political relationships indicated by colors and connecting lines. The scenario, the Vrenian counselor began, is this. You are the governor of a border system that stands between two rival powers, the Celestial Assembly and the Corvan Dominion. Both sides demand your allegiance. Both threaten consequences if you choose their rival. Your system contains resources vital to both powers, but insufficient military strength to defend against either. What do you do? Daniel stared at the holographic display, his mind racing. This wasn't a test of knowledge. It was a test of how he thought, how he approached impossible situations. Park's words echoed. Be unpredictable. Be human. Can I ask questions about the scenario? He said. You may, the Carthaxian counselor allowed. What do the people in my system want? Not the politicians or the military, but the actual inhabitants. There was a pause, as if the council hadn't expected that question. Clarify your meaning, the Liquid Light counselor said. Every choice affects real beings, Daniel said. Before I make any decisions about allegiances or resources or military strategy, I need to know what the actual people living in this system want their future to look like. Are they traders who need stable routes? Colonists who want independence? Scientists who need access to knowledge? Their needs should inform my strategy. The chamber's observers buzzed with discussion. Daniel caught fragments of translation. Unusual approach. Sentimental. Potentially naive. Assume, the Vrenian counselor said, that the population is diverse, with varied interests. Proceed with your analysis. Daniel studied the holographic display again, seeing it not as an abstract puzzle, but as a web of relationships, needs, and leverage points. I wouldn't choose either side, he said finally. The chamber erupted in multiple languages, sounds ranging from approval to outrage. Daniel stood his ground, waiting for the noise to subside enough for him to continue. Explain, the Liquid Light counselor commanded, and the observers fell silent. Choosing either the Assembly or the Dominion means becoming dependent on that power's protection and priorities, Daniel said. My system becomes a bargaining chip in their larger conflicts, a resource to be exploited, or a battlefield to be fought over. The question assumes those are my only options, but that's not true. Then what would you propose? The Carthaxian counselor asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity. Daniel pointed to the trade routes visible in the hologram. I'd make my system valuable to both sides in ways that don't require exclusive allegiance. Open the trade routes to everyone, but charge transit fees that fund our own defense capabilities. Offer the resources both sides want, but through transparent auctions that prevent either from gaining monopolistic control. Create incentives for cooperation rather than competition. And if both sides still demand allegiance, the Vrenian counselor challenged. Then I'd call their bluff, Daniel said. Neither side benefits from a prolonged conflict over a border system when they have larger strategic concerns. If I make occupation or destruction more costly than cooperation, if I create economic and political mechanisms that reward leaving us neutral, then allegiance becomes less important than stability. You assume rational actors, one of the observers called out. What if they act irrationally? What if they attack anyway? Then I'd have failed, Daniel admitted. But choosing sides guarantees conflict eventually. This approach at least creates a chance for something better. It's not perfect, but perfect isn't an option in real governance. The council members conferred among themselves, their discussion involving communication methods Daniel couldn't fully perceive. Color shifts, harmonic resonances, movements too subtle for human senses. Finally, the liquid-like counselor spoke. Your answer demonstrates creative thinking and an understanding that political problems rarely have binary solutions. However, it also reveals potential naivety about power dynamics and the willingness of established authorities to tolerate neutrality. The counselor paused. The trial is judged acceptable, with reservations. 2 down. Daniel felt exhaustion creeping into his bones, the adrenaline that had sustained him through the physical trial fading to leave behind aches and pains that the medical treatment had only partially addressed. One more trial. Just one more. The final trial, the Carthaxian counselor announced, will test your social and cultural adaptability. You will be placed in a formal reception with representatives from multiple assembly species. You must navigate the interaction without causing offense or incident. The trial begins immediately. Before Daniel could respond, the holographic display dissolved and the chamber's walls are pacified, transforming the space into something resembling a formal reception hall. The council members vanished from view, though Daniel suspected they were still watching. The observers remained visible in the background, a constant reminder of scrutiny. Beings began approaching him, real, physical beings, not holograms. A Vrenian warrior diplomat, her scarring indicating high rank. A Carthaxian merchant whose exoskeleton bore trade patterns. A crystalline intelligence similar to Councillor Jan. Others Daniel didn't recognize, each one presenting a test of his ability to interact appropriately. The Vrenian approached first, stopping at a precise distance that Park's training identified as the formal greeting space. You fought well against the Dralith, she said, recklessly, but well. Daniel recognized the implicit question. Would he accept the backhanded compliment or challenge the insult? Park's voice in his memory. Show respect, acknowledge your limitations, demonstrate willingness to learn. Thank you, he said, maintaining appropriate eye contact, just enough to show respect without challenging. I'm aware my techniques were crude. I'd welcome the opportunity to learn proper combat methods from someone with your experience. The Vrenian's expression shifted minutely. Approval, Daniel hoped. Perhaps, she said, if you survive the day. The Carthaxian merchant was next, her approach more casual, but her eyes sharp with calculation. I understand you're from Earth's lower districts, she said. Difficult place to grow up, I imagine. We have similar conditions on some Carthaxian worlds. Scarcity breeds either desperation or ingenuity. Daniel heard the probe, the attempt to establish common ground or identify weaknesses. It taught me to recognize value wherever it appears, he said carefully, including in unexpected places, like strangers in the rain. The merchant's mandibles clicked. Amusement or acknowledgement, Daniel couldn't tell. Diplomatic answer. Your species learns quickly. The interactions continued, each one a miniature negotiation of status, respect, and intention. Daniel made mistakes. He held eye contact too long with one species, stood too close to another, used a gesture that apparently had different meanings in different contexts. But he acknowledged each error when it was pointed out, apologized when appropriate, and adjusted his behavior immediately. Then Lyrianne entered the reception space. She moved through the assembled beings with practiced grace, acknowledging greetings and offering responses with the kind of effortless courtesy that came from a lifetime of diplomatic training. When she reached Daniel, she stopped, and the entire room's attention focused on their interaction. Candidate Reeves, she said, her tone formal, but her eyes holding something warmer. I understand you've completed 2 trials successfully. Daniel bowed, deeper than he had for anyone else, recognizing the moment for what it was, a test within a test. How would he interact with the being who had sponsored him? Too familiar would suggest presumption. Too formal would deny the connection that had brought him here. Your radiance, he said, straightening. I've tried my best. Whether that's enough remains to be seen. Your best, Lyrian said, included sharing an umbrella when you had no obligation to do so. I suspect that's more than enough. She moved on, the moment passing, but Daniel saw approval in some of the observers' reactions. He'd walked the line correctly, acknowledging their relationship without exploiting it. The final test came from an unexpected source, a human. Ambassador Park approached him, but her demeanor was different, more formal, almost cold. Candidate Reeves, she said, loud enough for others to hear. I must express concern about your performance in the intellectual trial. Your proposed solution showed insufficient understanding of established power structures. Some might interpret this as dangerous naivety that could jeopardize assembly interests. Daniel's mind raced. This was deliberate, a final challenge to see how he would handle criticism from his own species in front of alien observers. Too defensive would suggest inability to accept feedback. Too accepting would validate the criticism and undermine his credibility. Ambassador Park, he said carefully, I respect your experience and expertise in these matters. My solution may indeed be naive. I have weeks of knowledge where you have decades. But I'd argue that fresh perspectives, even imperfect ones, have value in preventing institutional stagnation. The Assembly invited me to attempt these trials, knowing I would approach problems differently than someone with traditional training. Dismissing those differences entirely would make the entire exercise pointless. Park's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw the slightest flicker in her eyes. Approval, pride, maybe both. An interesting point, she said neutrally, then turned and walked away. The reception continued for another hour. Daniel navigated conversation after conversation, each one testing different aspects of cultural knowledge, social awareness, and diplomatic capability. He made mistakes, recovered from some more gracefully than others, and gradually felt himself adapting to the complex dance of interspecies interaction. Finally, the walls cleared, and the council reappeared in their positions. The observers fell silent, every being in the chamber focused on what came next. Candidate Daniel Reeves, the Liquid Light Councillor, said, You have completed all 3 trials of merit. The council will now render judgment. The weight felt eternal. Daniel stood on the platform, aware of his torn clothing, his injuries, the exhaustion making his legs tremble. He thought about his grandmother, about the mining station he'd never reach, about Lyrian standing alone in the rain, trusting a stranger with her life. The physical trial, the Vrenian councillor announced, demonstrated adaptability and survival instinct despite lack of formal training. Acceptable. The intellectual trial, the Carthaxian councillor continued, showed creative thinking and willingness to challenge assumptions, tempered by acknowledged limitations. Acceptable with reservations. The social trial, the crystalline councillor added, their voice like distant bells, revealed capacity for cultural learning and diplomatic flexibility, with noted errors that were addressed appropriately. Acceptable. The Liquid Light councillor spoke last. The council's judgment is not unanimous. Some members harbour concerns about your lack of experience, your species' relative newness to galactic society, and the political implications of accepting a human into a position of trust within the assembly structure. Daniel's heart sank. After everything, after surviving and adapting and pushing himself beyond anything he'd thought possible, it still wasn't enough. However, the councillor continued, the purpose of the trials is not to confirm existing assumptions, but to test whether an individual possesses the fundamental qualities necessary for growth and service. In this, you have succeeded. The council judges your attempt satisfactory. The chamber erupted. Some observers cheered or produced their species equivalent. Others registered clear disapproval. Through it all, Daniel stood frozen, trying to process what he'd just heard. Satisfactory. He'd passed. "Candidate Reeves!" Lyrian's voice cut through the noise, and Daniel turned to find her approaching the platform. "By the authority granted to me as Crown Princess of the Celestial Assembly, I officially offer you a position within my personal staff, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Do you accept?" Daniel looked at her, at Ambassador Park standing nearby with an expression of fierce pride, at the assembled beings representing hundreds of worlds and countless perspectives. He thought about the umbrella, about the simple choice to help a stranger, about how the smallest acts of kindness could somehow change everything. "Yes, Your Radiance," he said. "I accept." The formal ceremony that followed was a blur. Oaths spoken in multiple languages, symbols he didn't fully understand, pressed into his palm with ceremonial blades, acknowledgements and congratulations from beings whose names he'd never remember. Through it all, Lyrian remained nearby, a steady presence in the chaos. Finally, hours later, when the ceremonies had concluded and most of the observers had departed, Daniel found himself alone with Lyrian in a quiet antechamber overlooking the station's central plaza. "I still can't believe this is real," he said. 3 days ago, I was heading to a mining station. Now I'm apparently a member of the royal staff of one of the most powerful governments in the galaxy." 3 days ago, Lyrian said softly, "I was alone in the rain, hunted and afraid, wondering if my security detail's betrayal meant the end of everything I'd worked for. Then a stranger offered me an umbrella without asking my name or expecting anything in return." She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes Daniel saw exhaustion that matched his own, and something else. Hope, perhaps, or gratitude. "You reminded me," she continued, "that sometimes the most important alliances aren't built through grand political gestures or calculated exchanges of favor. Sometimes they begin with simple kindness offered freely from one person to another in the middle of a rainstorm." Daniel smiled. "Best 17 credits I ever spent on an umbrella." Lyrian laughed, a sound like crystal chimes that he would learn to recognize over the years to come, through diplomatic crises and cultural exchanges, through battles political and sometimes physical, through all the impossible complications that came with bridging the gap between humanity and the wider galaxy. But that was all ahead of them, unwritten and uncertain. In that moment, they simply stood together, two beings who had started as strangers and become something more, looking out at the vast station and the infinite stars beyond, ready to face whatever came next. The umbrella, Daniel learned later, had been preserved by Assembly archivists as a historical artifact, a cheap polymer thing that cost 17 credits and changed the course of interstellar relations. Somewhere in a museum on the Celestial Spire, it still sits in a place of honor, labeled with words in multiple languages, the Umbrella Accord, where the greatest alliance began with the smallest gesture of human kindness. And beneath that, in smaller text, added by Ambassador Park, with what Daniel suspected was deliberate irony, "Never underestimate the diplomatic potential of keeping someone dry in the rain."